Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to aidsmapLIVE, A Long Life with HIV. My name's Susan Cole, and I'm thrilled to be joined by an absolutely incredible panel of guests with over 130 years of life with HIV between them. So it's going to be really exciting. Thank you so much, everyone joining on Facebook and Twitter. Please get your questions over. I've got Juno Roche, if Juno Roche could pop up. Hi, Joe.
Hi there.
Hi, Joe.
Poised to take the questions.
Yes, so Joe is on Facebook and on Twitter, so please get your questions and comments and feedback over to us, as long as it's positive feedback, and that's going to be really, really helpful. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on my guests in reverse order of when they were diagnosed with HIV. So first of all, may I have Dr. Tristan Barber.
Hi.
Hello, Tristan.
Wow,
Hi.
I feel like a young boy. Thank you, Susan. You've made me feel young.
Absolutely. Dr. Tristan Barber is an HIV consultant at the Royal Free Hospital and diagnosed in 2002. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yes. So you're one of you're the baby of the show. So Tristan, you took part in the Normalizing HIV challenge, where you talked about how long you were living with HIV. What's the response been like to that?
Wow, the response has really been quite phenomenal, I have to say. I mean, it's been quite overwhelming. I've had some fantastic positive messages back from that. I've had some personal messages that have really made me cry. Very emotional indeed, including some people I've not heard from in a while. Yeah, it's been fantastic. I think I feel it is a real privilege being able to share your status. I kind of acknowledge that I'm in a pretty privileged and well-supported position. And I think it's so important when there are so many people out there who don't feel able to share their HIV status and discuss their status, to show that some of us are living well with HIV, and maybe empower some people to feel a little more confident to talk a little more openly. I don't know. I hope it has a beneficial effect for someone somewhere.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll be seeing you again in a second. So can I have my next youngster, Matthew Hodson? Hello, Matthew.
I never get described as, oh, shut up, I'm not a youngster. I'm a proud middle-aged man.
So for those of you who don't know, Matthew is the executive director of the very fine HIV information charity, NAM AIDSmap, an actor, a prolific tweeter. I think many of you may have seen his exercise photos and like muscles on Twitter.
Yeah, I try and kind of keep the kind of chat shows like kind of fully clothed, just for a change, because this is actually how I normally dress. Just what I post on Twitter is not what I normally look like.
That's
honestly.
Right. Matthew, I think a little bird tells me that you were in the Daily Telegraph flexing your muscles. What's that all about?
Because they do a regular feature on middle-aged people who are relatively fit. And they contacted me and asked me if I wanted to do it. I was like, obviously shocked and appalled that they thought that I was middle-aged, but then I kind of thought, well, actually, I certainly don't want to live twice as long as I have lived, so I hope I'm at least at middle, maybe 2/3 of the way through. So yeah, midlife fitness it was called. I don't know if it's midlife fitness or midlife crisis, but certainly one of the two.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you very much. See you in a second. So if we can have our third guest, Bob Leahy. If we can have Bob.
How are you?
Hi, Bob. How are you doing in Canada?
Hey, Really good to see you here. England is actually where I was born and where I lived until I was in my early 20s, and I came to Canada in 1971. So it's nice to be connected with real English people again.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it's wonderful to have you on. So Bob is a banker turned writer and AIDS activist, diagnosed with HIV in 93. Is that right, Bob?
That's correct. Yes, September. So it's my anniversary just passed.
And I read your absolutely brilliant article in Pos magazine where you describe yourself as a septuagenarian, being in your 70s.
Yeah, I had to actually check the spelling on that because it's not a word I use very much. In fact, it's hard to describe exactly who we older people are. We older adults? Are we seniors? Are we geezers? And whatever the female equivalent of geezers is, I don't know. I'm still searching for the terminology. Maybe you can help me as we go through.
So, Bob, do you have a sense of pride in reaching this milestone?
Yes, I think so. It's also kind of a solemn thing. When occasionally I think the downside is you tend to finally think about, well, maybe, I'm 7/8 into my life. Those sort of issues are starting to pop into my mind where I pushed them out before. But yeah, in terms of feeling good about myself and pride, I've never felt anything but. So yeah, I came out very quickly when I was diagnosed in 93. I'd be fortunate that as a privileged white gay man, I haven't had to deal a lot with stigma, but I've certainly spent a lot of time trying to battle it for others who are facing much more stigmatizing conditions than I ever have had to.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's an honor and a privilege. So see you in a sec. So if we can have the next guest on, Juno Roche. Hello, Juno.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Wonderful to have you in lovely sunny Spain.
So Juno, very sunny.
Yeah, wonderful. Not like Croydon, very dark. No. Yeah. So Juno is a writer and thinker diagnosed in 1991. Is that right?
Yeah, I just feel really old. I mean, my placement in this list, I was just thinking it's just going to, well, thank God there's someone that comes after me, bless them. But I mean, it feels like a long time now. I suppose it is a long time now. Yeah, I've kind of got used to it. I mean, I've got used to the kind of years rolling by and it just becoming, the way it is really.
Yeah, brilliant. And Juno, you've got 3 books out at the minute, but I understand one of your books is currently up for an award. Can you tell us about that?
It is. It's been shortlisted for the Polari Award. So I feel really blessed, really, because my first book, Queer Sex, was longlisted for the award, and then my second one, Trans Power, which is out in all good bookshops and is very reasonably priced, is shortlisted, which is, like when I started writing, people said no one was interested in reading books about trans lives, especially about trans people and sex and them having sex, and especially by a trans person who was living with HIV. No one's going to want to read your books. And actually, I think last weekend I looked, and my third book, which just came out during lockdown, was at number 1 on the audiobook politics charts. Yeah, so it's like, it's like that feels just like a complete honor, really. So yes, so it's up for an award, and I can't wait. And it's been being shortlisted for an award. That I never thought that I was good enough to write, let alone get an award. So yeah, I'm overjoyed.
So proud and fingers crossed for you, Juno.
Thank you.
So, and then finally, if we can bring on our last guest, Winnie Ssanyu Sseruma. Hello, Winnie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Wonderful. So Winnie is an international development consultant based in London with over 2 decades working in HIV, but you were diagnosed in 1988. Is that right?
I was diagnosed in 1988 when HIV was definitely, when you got that diagnosis, it was a death sentence. To be sitting here, with you and with everybody on this panel, 30 years on, when, I wasn't supposed to be here because there was no treatment, and everything, against all odds, is just unbelievable.
Wonderful. Well, it's a huge honor and a privilege to have you on here, Winnie. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we've had so many questions over for this tremendous panel. So if I can have all of you on, please, that would be wonderful. So, hi everyone. It's a bit like the Brady brunch. Say hello.
Hello.
So I'd like to direct my first question, first of all, to those of you who were diagnosed before combination therapy. Did you really think that you'd be here today in a conversation about aging with HIV?
No. I mean, I didn't even think that I would. I didn't even think that I would see. I remember going to seeing the doctor, and I had my partner at the time was rushed into hospital. They were put on life support with PCP, and I had no CD4 cell. I mean, I think it was like 5 or 6 left, and they said to me, they wanted to give me a piece of paper which was called a DS 1500, which said that you were expected not to live for more than 6 months. And it effectively entitles you to death benefit. And I remember just looking at it and just seeing at the top. And so I literally took each week at a time, and I didn't dare take more than that, because at the time friends were kind of dropping like flies all around. So to think that I would be here 30 years on with a group of other people, and not only here, but kind of thriving and in Andalusia and doing the stuff I'm doing. I mean, no, I wouldn't have thought it for a second. No.
How about you, Winnie and Bob?
Of course, I didn't expect to be here at all. I was diagnosed when I was 27 years of age, and I just literally thought I would not be able to make 30 years old. So to be here thinking about turning 60 next year is just short of a miracle, really. And I'm very, very, very proud to be here because it's not just about the number of years, but it's also about living a life which is intentional, which is full, which is productive. And so it's amazing.
Wonderful. And how about you, Bob?
Yeah, I'm glad, Winnie, you mentioned what you just said, because I think quality of life for us is sometimes a sort of neglected thing that's secondary to viral suppression, for instance, secondary to being undetectable. So I like how you mentioned that that's so important, and hopefully we can talk about that at some point. I don't know. I really think quality of life is as equally as important as we get older as the medical things. But as for me, it's the luck of the draw. I mean, in 1993, it wasn't a good time to be diagnosed, but I had pretty good avoidance strategies, so I tended to just get on with things. But at that time too, I mean, my AIDS work, when I went to meetings and stuff, we were talking about things like end of life issues, about power of attorney, about palliative care, those sort of issues, and they just sort of rolled off my back at the time. But interestingly enough, I think we're now at a time where some of us have cycled through a long period of good health, and now we're starting to need to get into a slightly different frame set and really start to think about some of the things that perhaps we'd avoided for many years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and that's definitely something I want to
That's a bit of a downer, isn't it? I'll be brighter next time.
And thank you. Yeah, I will want to explore that a little bit more, but I wanted to ask you, Matthew, as someone that was diagnosed soon after combination therapy, were you confident that you would live a long life?
No, I don't think I was. I mean, I did actually get diagnosed because I knew about combination therapy, and I was like, okay, now I can see the value of finding out, because I obviously had some idea that I might be. But when I was diagnosed in 1998, so it was like kind of just 18 months after the advent of combination therapy, and I kind of thought, well, I probably won't live to 50, or 50 was what I set as my goal. And so I turned 53 years ago, and that was kind of quite a surprise. And I've had some people say to me since then, they said, well, actually, of course you were going to live to 50, don't be stupid. But there was an article that came out, it was in the Bay Area Reporter, and it came out in 1998, in June 1998. And the front page was no obits, because it was the first time that they had not published an AIDS obituary for 15 years. And I looked at this article the other day, and it's really interesting kind of that I wasn't at all alone in thinking that what we had as treatment was something that was going to extend our lives. But the idea that we should now have equal life expectancy was completely not where people's heads were at there. And there's that really interesting thing that it said in that article. It said the best treatment is prevention. And actually, of course, now we know that the treatment is the best prevention that there is, and it's kind of fantastic how we've moved on, and how the life expectancy is now good. That we know that we can't pass it on when we're on treatment, and all of that is such wonderful changes. But as we get older, have the systems been set up to support us? And I think that's something we really need to be thinking about now, because this is a challenge which we didn't expect to be facing.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And Tristan, as a healthcare professional living with HIV, were you scared when you got your diagnosis, or did you sort of know everything?
Ooh, big question. Was I scared? I think it's sometimes difficult when you work in a sector to be a patient. I thought it was very important to be a patient and not try and be a professional and manage myself. And I felt empowered by knowing the diagnosis, actually. But I think I went very quickly into a study for people who were seroconverting, and I probably overvalued the study a little bit, because it was an interruption study. So I took treatment for a short period, for 12 weeks, became undetectable, and then interrupted therapy, thinking I was maybe, had a chance at being cured of HIV, very naively. In retrospect, and of course my viral load came bouncing back, and that was when I really, I was a bit low at that point, maybe because I thought by joining a research study and finding out early I was in a really exciting place, and it was all kind of new and fascinating and potentially life-changing for everyone. And instead it became kind of normal, and viral load was back and had to think about lifelong treatment. So maybe I was a bit naive.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that Winnie and Bob highlighted was quality of life. There's so much focus on people living a long life with HIV. Do you think that there is enough focus on quality of life? And how many people do you think living with HIV are having a good quality of life? And I'm throwing that open to everyone.
I'll start off. I really don't think that there is enough focus on quality of life, but I think people living with HIV are coming around to it. And I think also health providers are starting to actually focus on a little bit on that. I would like to pick up a little bit on what Tristan said about being empowered as a patient. for me, living with HIV has been an empowering experience rather than a disempowering experience, because I've learned so much. You know, it's not just the length of years. It's about, you know, remaining in work, you know, being able to do what you actually want to do, looking after yourself, taking those preventive measures, you know, services, accessing mammograms, smear tests, you know, all of that is good quality of life. But I also support a lot of other people. A lot of other people depend on me, and many of them are not even living with HIV.
What do the rest of you think?
Well, maybe I can chip in because, you know, I think Winnie has made some good points. I think in terms of the emphasis on quality of life, in a sense, for a few years, we've been our own worst enemies. And I say that without being critical. There has been a huge emphasis since 1996 on the effectiveness of treatment, and in particular in the last few years, of course, on viral suppression and U. And I mean, what a great thing that's been. I can't knock it. It's been an incredible game changer. The downside, if there is one, is there is an emphasis on the benefits of treatment, of being undetectable, as if, and 1990, which are the targets we all countries are operating on, with the last 90 being achieving undetectable. I mean, that kind of drives it home that the emphasis for our targets have been on getting to undetectable. I think we've made really good strides in getting that message out. I've been part of that effort in Canada for sure. But I think now we need to recognize, yes, what happens, we are undetectable. What happens now? Are there other things that are more important? And I think quality of life is really needs a little bit more attention now. I think there have been efforts to create a fourth 90, so instead of 3 90s, we have fourth 90, with the fourth 90 representing quality of life. It's a tricky one to measure, though. How do you do it? And will every country be on the same page? A lot of stuff to work through. We're starting to work on that in Canada. I know there have been efforts elsewhere. But it would really be nice to have a more structured way to see how everybody's doing, not just from their viral status, but how they're doing mentally, physically, sexually, the whole package.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think it's kind of quite interesting, isn't it? Because
Susan, if I could mention a couple of things, I think we were really heavily focused in the UK on activities to try and help support better quality of life with aging, and of course a lot of that has stopped during the coronavirus pandemic, where we've been maintaining sort of fairly minimal services to try and, you know, get people their meds and get them bloods where necessary. And now we're having to look very much at which aspects of those services we can bring back in safely and who we prioritize for those, which isn't always an ideal situation. But it brings me a little bit back to thinking about, we have to remember that we're talking about a very diverse group of people living with HIV. So for me, I kind of split people into 4, and most of us are in even though I'm the youngest in terms of diagnosis here, we're still in the older groups, if you like, in terms of being before 2005. From 2005, treatment moved up to a CD4 count of 350. And then, of course, from 2015, we've had the START study where everyone with HIV goes on to treatment regardless of CD4 count. Now, you can be any age when you're diagnosed, but I think your issues about maintaining good quality of life if you're diagnosed after 2015 are still going to be significant with a lifelong condition. But compared to people who were diagnosed before 1996 with no triple therapy, with lots of bereavement, with psychosocial morbidity, often stopping paid work and expecting a limited life expectancy, the issues that those people need to really support their quality of life as they age are much more different, and for me still really sit within specialist HIV services, whereas as you're diagnosed later, perhaps your needs of quality of life become more like the general population.
And Juno, what do you think the psychological impact of living for many years with HIV is having on people, particularly those who are diagnosed before treatment.
I mean, I suppose as people were talking, I was just thinking, actually, I feel like my experience as a trans person living with HIV is different because there's a constant fight for, and for the whole of my trans life, there's been a fight for kind of trans equality, and it's a very ongoing fight. It's a very daily fight. It's a very visceral fight. And actually, I just done an event this afternoon where I said to them that, the numbers, there's often a figure quoted that, trans women are 19 times more likely to be positive than any other group. But actually, that's black and brown trans women. And I said to them this afternoon, I cannot imagine the difficulties of living at the intersection of being a black trans woman who is HIV positive. I mean, because you're facing so many things that actually, even as a white, middle-aged trans person, and I use they, them pronouns, which is why I'm saying person, I'm exhausted. So, I mean, I feel like I have to work really hard at quality of life, because life is not going to give me, a trip to the doctors for me is a barrage of transness and HIVness. And if you have that kind of intersection, it means that most doctors go, I just don't want to know. It would be, I had surgery many years ago, and I've not seen a single endocrinologist since, because there are none. And so in some kind of senses, I think it's really, we're at the cliff face at the moment in terms of trans equality, and it's a tough place to be. There are people for whom it's much tougher than me. I think that in that 19 times more likely for mainly black and brown trans women living in Latin America, sub-Saharan Africa, etc., etc. They're also amongst the people that are still dying of AIDS. The most impacted group. So I think when we talk about quality of life, we have to understand that for some people accessing quality of life, listen, if I went onto Tinder to find dates, I mean, I've done it recently for articles, and that literally the abuse that I've got. I've been called a dirty whore who is trying to infect people. How dare I? It's like we still are at that point in terms of, it's like we have a kind of duality. And I think, so I think again, words have huge meaning, and the word quality, like the word pride or proud, means different things to other people, because some people can't access those words. If you're a black trans woman and you're forced into sex work in North America and you can't access healthcare, I mean, and the threat of violence is tremendous. And I work really hard to get quality. I feel like I do have a quality of life. I feel like I work really hard at it, but there's many times in my day where I go, I'm just going to ignore that. When my books come out, my books do really well. When my books come out, I have somebody else appeared on screen. When my books come out, I have a massive abuse online. I mean, I just ignore it now. So at the same time, living with HIV, I'm also a trans person who has to live with kind of daily transphobia. That's tough.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine that's really tough. And I'd like to pick up on the theme of just in terms of like the inequalities of people living with HIV. And Winnie, I know that you do a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa. What's the experience of people getting older with HIV in some of the countries that you've been working in?
The experience is quite varied. It depends. It depends what country they're in. But I have to say that most people are accessing. Most people that I come into contact with are accessing treatment. Most of them. Most of them are women. I've met 99-year-old women living with HIV, and that's amazing. But these are women who are supported by mostly NGOs. there are a lot of other people that, can't have that support, who can't talk about, access to treatment, because there's still a lot of stigma in communities. And I want to pick up on what Juno said, and I do understand that as a trans person, that, yes, there's a lot of, hurdles to go through. But I also want to say that each person's experience of living with HIV is quite unique. It depends on what people are facing, and we all, have had unique experiences, and some are much harder than others. And we've had to fight for rights. I remember when I was diagnosed in '88, at that time, people didn't believe women were, because I was living, in northern, in Northern America. At that time, there was no knowledge that women were, getting HIV. So for me, it was about not saying anything to anybody for quite a long time, because I felt like, I was probably the only one. But we've also, since then, there's been a lot of fighting around, issues that are faced by women and all sorts of things. But there are a lot of people who still, to this day, do not have access to treatment. And that's why it is important for us to keep, advocating, in order for HIV to come to an end. Everybody has to access treatment, and we can't leave anybody behind.
I agree, absolutely. And Matthew, that's something that you talk quite a lot about, the importance of accessing treatment. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I just think it's absolutely terrible that after, 24 years, that we still have people who don't have access to treatment. Muted. I'm not muted.
Yeah, you would think it would be actually like, for once it is not me muting Matthew. That is sort of like living my dream. Are you back?
Can you hear me?
Matthew?
Still muted.
Can anyone else hear Matthew? Is it just me?
No, we can't hear Matthew.
Okay. Oh, well, Bob, welcome back. It's great to see you. But some people have sent some questions over to me ahead of the broadcast. Tristan, what are the prospects for people living with HIV as they get older?
I'm just going to apologise, Jules, if you can hear a lot of wind noise. I think it's the fan of my laptop that's overheating because you're also for people as they age. I mean, we are in a very lucky place now that people who are diagnosed with a good CD4 count and who, take what is now very well tolerated HIV treatment can have a very good life expectancy. What most of us struggle with is giving all of that, the boring stuff that all of us find hard to hear, which is the lifestyle modification advice that is really what keeps us all so well. So I've been part of an aging meeting that's happening at the moment in New York today and will also be on tomorrow. And someone jokingly said, do we have to tell people that every time they take their HIV medicines, they should do 30 minutes of exercise and eat a healthy salad? But actually, unfortunately, just like people without HIV infection, it is our exercise, our drinking in moderation, avoiding smoking, recreational drugs, and so on, that will help us maximize our healthy living, if that's what we want to do, over a long period of time. And of course, it's about empowering personal choice to understand the implications of all of our decisions. That's what's so important.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Well, my aunt has just messaged me and said, Matthew is not muted. I can definitely hear him.
It's just, can people hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can actually.
Okay, jolly good, jolly good.
I can hear
well,
you now. Matthew, I just wanted to move on from what Tristan was talking about and living well with HIV. I mean, what's your strategy?
Oh, I'm just really vain, so it's really easy to be motivated to keep exercising and to eat healthily. Unfortunately, I'm also a bit foolish, and so I still continue to drink, which is really bad, and you shouldn't do that. So do as I advise and not what I do on that one. I think it's really interesting because, you know, all of the advice you give to people living for a long life with HIV, it is the same advice as you would pretty much give to people who aren't living with HIV, apart from the take your treatment, which of course is vital. But a lot of the conditions which people with HIV are more likely to suffer, you know, things like osteoporosis or heart conditions, some cancers, diabetes, and there are associations between those and HIV that may not actually, many of them may not actually be as a result of the virus. Some of them are, some may be as a result of the medication, but also it may well be a result of just other lifestyle factors. People living with HIV are much more likely to come from communities that are already marginalized, and people who come from marginalized communities suffer health inequalities anyway. And so things like healthy eating, exercise, diet, cutting out the alcohol, definitely don't smoke, or take recreational drugs. These are things which we all should be doing, but perhaps it's a little bit more important if you are living with HIV because you're just in those higher risk groups.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome back, Bob. I know you've had a few technical issues. Bob, there's been a lot of focus on people aging with HIV, often people in their 50s, but not much about HIV and the aged. For instance, people in their 70s. Would you say that their needs are different?
I would, and I think I can speak from personal experience here because I'm 74, so I've been talking about aging for quite some time. I think the conversation in communities has been going for 20 years, but now I think I see myself in a different category, and whether we call it again aged as opposed to aging, I think suddenly you get the concept. It's the concept of traveling there versus arriving at your destination. So what I'm interested in focusing on now, because I'm living through it, is the experiences and challenges and supports required and treatment required for those of us who pass that magic barrier of either 65 or 70 or even more. I think what we face to some extent it is ageism. I think we haven't talked about ageism, but it's present in our society in many ways. And I think our community and the treatment we receive is not immune to aging. I mean, if you think, I don't want to go so far as to say all people are dispensable, but you only have to look at how the COVID crisis was managed, certainly in the US, where they were basically prepared to open up the country because the mortalities would be old people, and the sense that maybe those old lives aren't as important as young ones. Of course, now we've learned that younger people are more susceptible to COVID, but certainly in the early days, there was an issue that some of us felt our older generation seemed to be disposable. So that's an example of the ageism that exists throughout the community, I think.
I think that really resonated for a lot of people with HIV. I mean, I think when the HIV or AIDS crisis first started, and it was because it was gay people and because it was African people and because it was drug users who were more likely to acquire HIV and were more likely to die, there was a real sense that sometimes the government just didn't care that much, and that if it had been white, cis, heterosexual men who were in the firing line, that actually more action would have been taken earlier. And so when that was happening with COVID, and there was that feeling that I'm just not sure they actually care, I'm not sure they think these lives are important. Yeah. And it was sickening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that the Judith Butler, the philosopher, talks about disposable lives, and how, like, in a society like the ones that we live in, you know, a certain amount of lives are seen as being disposable, and that was always part of the problem with the AIDS pandemic or epidemic, was that, you know, the lives that were being lost were seen as being disposable anyway. And then the more that people got it, they just kind of carried that narrative on and said, well, if you're a woman and you're stupid enough to get it, well, then yours is a disposable life. And if you're trans and you get it, well, then yours is a disposable life anyway. And I mean, I think that in some kind of way, we've gone a long way in terms of the work that we've all done to breaking that down and to saying, well, because we've had to fight for it. You know, and gay men started that fight, and I think that trans people are doing the same thing now, and that women are doing it. I work with a Safe Fear Forum. You know, it's like we're beginning to fight back and say, well, actually, no, you know, we our lives aren't disposable. And actually, I think that COVID has highlighted how many people were horrified, because those were our parents and our grandparents and our neighbours that were dying in care homes, and more of us were horrified by that than not horrified by that. And, you know, my only hope is that taught people something about the nature of lives and disposable. I mean, I don't think they've ever learnt the lesson. I still think that the stigma towards people with HIV is pretty strong, unfortunately. But I mean, I hope that they kind of, in the longer term, that they learn the lessons. I don't want them to learn them horribly, but I do think it's a lesson about humanity, that, you know, no lives are disposable. No one got HIV, because, you know, when people say to me, not that they do that much anymore, but when they used to say to me, how did you get HIV? I always say to them, well, out of love, because I was in love. You know, that was simply, I was just in love. And it's like, it didn't come out of, you know, what are you going to do? Are you going to chastise love or create a narrative around love? So, I mean, I think I completely agree that notion of disposable lives is horrible, Matthew. It's really, it always was.
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree with you. And if we could just touch on a bit more about COVID, Tristan, for older people living with HIV, are there greater risk from COVID? That's a question that comes up quite a lot.
So the data sets in HIV around the COVID risk, not only of acquiring COVID, but also of whether or not you have more severe disease, remain quite mixed, really. So there's some signal that perhaps people with HIV might be a little bit more at risk of getting COVID. Some signs that perhaps people that get admitted to hospital maybe spend a little bit more time in hospital, but not that there's any more significant death from COVID. So no kind of clear sign that, you know, you're actually going to have a worse outcome. It's all a bit mixed at the moment. I think people really still have to follow the general advice, which is shielding. If they have another condition, that means they need to shield. And I would include having a very low CD4 count in that category. If you're in the UK, or even if you're overseas, looking at the British HIV Association website has very good advice that's been updated really regularly. I think it's been one of the best go-to sources for COVID information for people living with HIV. But no, at the moment, no clear indication that you need to do anything otherwise particularly special just because of your HIV status. Wonderful.
And Winnie, what's been the psychological impact of COVID for older people living with HIV?
I think in terms of that, we have yet to really determine, you know, what that impact has been, because we're still going through this pandemic, you know, and it is hard to know what's going on, you know, in people's lives. If you're talking about places like different African countries, I think the surprise there, you know, apart from maybe South Africa, is I think we're still trying to work out, you know, how in Africa COVID hasn't had the impact that everybody thought that it was going to have. And people still don't know that. You know, I think what is being said at the moment is that, you know, maybe the numbers are not, are not all counted and everything, but it's still a very, very difficult picture to assess, you know. So it is really difficult to say. I really can't answer that question until we probably are further down the line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Tristan, have you got any thoughts about why things seem better in South Africa for people living with HIV?
Well, Winnie's right in that, you know, testing and knowing about the cases is absolutely key. I think one of the things we thought at the beginning of the pandemic earlier in the year was that although people were worried about healthcare systems in sub-Saharan Africa, the median age of the population in sub-Saharan Africa is much lower than in North America or in Europe. So I think the median age in sub-Saharan Africa is about 18, where you have 19, yeah. So you have a population that's much, much younger, and as you know, we've not seen a serious impact of COVID-19 in very young people in North America and in the European area as well. So perhaps some of it is driven by that that population statistic that you're looking at on average at a much younger population.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Something I get asked a lot about is menopause. I don't know why they're asking me, but in terms of menopause and women living with HIV as they get older, is there a sense that women with HIV may experience the menopause a little bit earlier and may have worse symptoms? I know the Sophia Forum's doing quite a lot of amazing work at the minute around women getting older with HIV.
Are you asking, Susan?
Yeah, I'm asking. Yeah, I'm just putting it out there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been through the menopause, you know. I remember when it hit me, and even though I was aware that this thing was coming, when menopause started happening, I was clueless until maybe like 3 months in, and the penny dropped, you know. And it is really, really difficult, you know, to talk about, because, you know, a lot of people still don't want to talk about menopause, you know, whether people are living with HIV or not, you know. I know I constantly talk about it, and I see people just, you know, getting shocked. And I'm like, yes, I've been through it, and this is how it manifests itself. And I think that is such a taboo subject at the moment. And I do think that some people have had early menopause, you know, and even didn't know that it was menopause. So we have yet to really unpack, you know, that area of work. And it is important that we continue to do and to be involved in research around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
and Juno, what's the Sophia Forum up to in relation to work with older women living with HIV?
Well, I think our campaign, which is We Are Still Here, which has 8 asks, which I don't know off the top of my head, but essentially it's everything that we've been saying here, you know, which is around the women who are aging with HIV should be meaningfully involved in research, which we're not. Because ageism is a massive thing. I think it was Bob that said earlier, you know, ageism, the place where ageism meets sexism. Again, it's that kind of brutal place where people just kind of write women's lives off. I mean, if that wasn't the case, then the issues around cardiology wouldn't be kind of growing, and the kind of the wider issues around cardiology and women presenting with kind of heart attacks, massive heart attacks, and they've gone to their doctor 4 or 5 times and the doctor's just said, you've got acid reflux, or you've got, you know. And I think it's the same thing with for an awful lot of women, be that the menopause or other issues around their around HIV and aging. I think women are kind of constantly faced with a set of blank faces, and the research backs that up. That if women are included, we're included in a way that we would never have written ourselves in like that. So the research about women needs to be created by women. I mean, we have some brilliant researchers, Bagashri, Shima. I mean, we have so many good, and our own Jackie Stevenson, who works, who is part of the Sophia Forum, who's just done some brilliant research about women aging with HIV. I mean, but you know, there's no money in it. So it's that thing again that we face, that kind of barrier that you face constantly, which is that somehow you've got to try and create funding to research these really needy things that a lot of people are going, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Women, you know, the jokes about menopause have been around for tens and tens of years. Of men, I mean, there used to be a regular joke on television. Oh, she's just going through her time of life. She's just, you know, so in that sense, women just endured that and just in silence, and have had terrible times. So I think that the work that the Sophia Forum is doing now is just, you know, it's just vital. I mean, I've recently come back to the Sophia Forum because I completely missed them. I missed being with that group of brilliant women who are just doing such imperative work, really. So I would urge everyone to follow the work, to look at the campaign, and to support the work, because we need it. We do need it. We're, you know, it's like it's women in their broadest form, in their most diverse range. Trans women, you know, women of colour, whoever it is, women, working class women. You know, we're kind of constantly trying to get the means to do better research and better work and create better structures. So.
Yeah, wonderful. And Tristan, you were at a conference for 2 days about aging with HIV. Was there anything specifically about women aging with HIV that's come up?
Ooh, we've been through, so it's day one today, day two is tomorrow. We have, there was some interesting research presented today, actually, that was looking at markers of frailty. And there's also an interesting discussion that was about weight gain, which is obviously a very hot topic at the moment in HIV, being associated with certain HIV treatments, and we still don't really know what to do to reverse that. And of course, the big signal for weight gain has been seen in Black African women in a study that was mainly conducted in South Africa. So that was discussed. Something that was interesting that I caught was a short research presentation looking about markers for frailty. And they were looking specifically at a protein called steroid hormone binding globulin, which carries your sex hormones around in your blood. Women tend to have higher levels. And there was an early study showing that this was SHBG, as it's known. Levels of SHBG in this small study were seen to be a good predictor of developing frailty in later life for women, but the signal wasn't there in men. So yeah, there were a couple of things that were discussed, early data, but there has been a good balance in this meeting so far.
Well, hopefully there's going to be more coming up. And Bob, do you think we need particular standards of care for older adults living with HIV?
I think it's certainly an area that we could do better on. I think we're talking about protocols and how, you know, standard things, standard tests that people living with HIV should be getting as they age. You know, I don't know how well those protocols are being implemented. I know my care isn't all that much different to what it was 25 years ago. I know I've had a bone marrow test thrown in. There's more attention to heart issues, but it's not much different. And having said that, the needs, I think, of a person to get older get very much more complicated. I've certainly found that myself. Instead of seeing one HIV doctor or one GP, before you know it, you're dealing with 5 different doctors. I'm diabetic. I had a heart condition a while back. It still has to be monitored. So I've got let me see, I've got my HIV specialist, my GP, my heart specialist, let me think. I'm diabetes too. I have diabetes now. So, but also things like hearing and eyesight and mobility gradually move in to the mix of medical issues you have to deal with. So I think as you get older, it becomes much complicated for you to manage, but much more important, much more complicated too for the system to manage you from a clinical perspective. And I think we have to think of ways that patients with complex needs, including HIV, not just dominated by including HIV, can be managed. And I think it's a long way to go before we get that down. Anyway, imperfect.
Thank you.
Because I was talking with Hank Trout last week, wasn't it?
Yes.
And he was involved in framing what have been referred to as the San Francisco principles, and that's acknowledging that now more than 50% of people in the US who are living with HIV are over the age of 50. I think it's actually the same in the UK as well. And yet the conversation is still very much often about younger people, and often older people, and particularly aged people, are left out of the conversation entirely. And so this idea, what they've done is they've framed these San Francisco principles, which are, it's very much, nothing about me without me. So it's about the active involvement of older people living with HIV in decisions about living with HIV, in conferences, let's discuss what the needs are, because I think it's something where we're meant to be just grateful to be alive. And again, that comes back to the quality of life. How can we live our best lives when some of us weren't expecting to be here?
Yeah, absolutely. We've only got 3 minutes more to go. So one quick fire question to all of you. What advice would you give to younger people living with HIV so they could lead a long and fulfilling life with HIV?
Well, I'll get in there really quickly. I really would love to have a project, like a mentoring project, where young activists meet up with older activists so that we could all learn from each other. They could learn from us as older activists, and we could learn from them. That would be great.
Brilliant. Juno?
Yeah, I would just say, just dream of anything at all. Just, it's like I'm here still all these years later and actually living my dream. This is my dream. My dream was to have a room with a view and to be a writer. And I would say, just if you are young and you've been diagnosed, just carry on dreaming. Just try and, if you can, compartmentalize the HIV and focus on the dreams, because those are the things that are going to make you want to live healthy and exercise and eat well and be happy. And trust me, stress is the biggest, impactful thing, or the most impactful thing on your well-being. So I would say just dream.
Wonderful. And then Tristan?
Oh, mine's a combination of, I'm going to sort of paraphrase Oscar Wilde and Whitney Houston all in one. It's about kind of...
Okay.
Yes. It's about being, I think you have to find being the best self that you can be, because everyone else is taken, and we need you to be the best self you can be. And learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. I think it's actually, we need it. We don't need people who can just assimilate and fit in. We want people who are angry and defining themselves and loving and beautiful and outrageous and all those things. We need that.
Wonderful. So then Bob, and then finally Matthew.
Well, I think it's a balance between attending to HIV, but also not letting it dominate your life. And I think, it's harder for some people than others. I think, the more marginalized you are, the harder it is to put HIV on the back burner. But certainly the message, the objective, I think, should be to not let HIV be a dominant force in your life. It really needn't be. Mm-hmm. Just try and live I won't say normal life, I hate that expression, but try and live a life where HIV is part of you, but does not dominate you.
Brilliant. And then finally, Matthew.
Well, I mean, whenever when I'm talking to someone and they've just recently been diagnosed, they're often really scared that they're going to die, and I assure them that they will eventually die. But if they take their meds, if they lead healthy lifestyles. They're going to live for a long time. So it's really important that they moisturize, because they'll regret it if they don't.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all so much. It's been a joy and a privilege having such what a wonderful panel of guests. I'd like to say a big thank you to Joe for helping with looking up for questions. Thank you to Disruptive Live for your technical wizardry, and a huge thank you for Wandsworth Oasis, who have sponsored this event. It's all been brilliant. Thank you all so much. Bye.